Hey, everybody. We're going to give you just a second to jump on. Hope everybody's having a great day. Wednesday, little cloudy out here in Georgia, but here the weather's great in Colorado. Hope y'all are experiencing the same. What a great presentation today. I'm really excited about. All right. Here they all come, Jessica.
Excellent. I'm excited.
All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today for the 2023 Professional Webinar Series hosted by Harmony Foundation. My name is Christy Weeks, and I'm their Brand and Digital Media Manager. Today's presentation, we are lucky enough to have Jessica Swan with Recovery Consulting join us. She's going to talk to us about justice, treatment, and recovery, the intersection of behavioral health and the justice system, which is something near and dear to my heart. It's something I studied and am very interested in. So I'm excited when Jess agreed to jump on here. But for those of you who are new, we're going to run through a few things about Harmony. Here's a couple of pictures of our campus. If you've never been, let us know. Come up and visit us. We'd love to have you. We are located on 43 acres up in Estes Park, Colorado. We are near the Rocky Mountain National Park. We are in our 54th year of treating addiction, and we are an abstinence-based program. We have about 77 or 70 beds in our residential program. We also have a full medical detox. We have a virtual IOP. We recently just added a third IOP. So if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out. We'll be happy to answer questions. We have a family support and education program that is bar none, one of the best out there. And we have a very robust alumni support services program for our amazing alumni. This is our beautiful Swickard building. It's one of my favorite pictures. I have to include it in there. We are individualized and gender-specific treatment. It's men and women 18 and over, evidence-based 12-step program, and a lifetime of support for our alumni and their family members. So if you do have any questions about any of the programming we have, please feel free to reach out. You can get a hold of somebody at 970-586-4491 or visit our website. You'll find lots of answers there, and any one of us would be happy to help you. So on to today, things to know. This webinar is being recorded and it will be accessible on our website by Friday. We do offer a CEU for this. It too will be emailed to you by end of day Friday. The goal is Thursday, but don't hold that to me. Friday, end of day, and you must be involved in this program for at least 45 minutes. We do have software that tracks how long you're involved. So if for some reason you need to jump off early, please shoot me an email if you would like a certificate of attendance versus a CEU. And there is a survey coming. Some of you see it at the end. If you're on long enough, at the very end, it'll pop up. If not, I promise I will include it in your email with your CEU. We want your response. We want to know what topics you're looking for. It's very valuable information to us. So please fill out that survey and shoot it back to us. We'd love to hear it. Now, on to the good stuff. Today's presenter is Jessica Swan, as I mentioned, with Recovery Consulting. I actually met Jessica about 8.5 years ago when I first started at Harmony. So so fortunate to have run into her recently, and she has so much to tell you. Here is her bio. If you want to read the full bio, head over to her website. That is the best place. You can go to recoveryconsulting.org. And we are so grateful she took time out of her day today to talk to us. So with that being said, that was a lot of words. I'm going to turn it over to Jess so she can get started. We will be answering questions. The chat box is open. Let us know where you're from, and we'll watch the questions, but I believe Jessica's going to answer them at the end. So she has a lot of information. I'm going to stop talking.
Awesome.
All yours.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So glad to be here. Yeah, there we go. You can see my screen now. These are my slides for today. You know, I have tons of information. I do this all the time where I just put too much stuff in there. So we'll see what we get through. But either way, Christy is going to provide you with a PDF of the slides when she sends out your info via email. So look at that. Look at that attachment that'll come when you get your certificate. Okay. So just in case we don't get through everything, or you're like, what the heck did she talk about? She threw too much information at me, that kind of thing. Let's get started with what we're going to talk about. The agenda is really simple. We're going to start by talking about what justice is. And see what we can figure out about that. Then we're going to go to figuring out what the makeup of our justice system is. And when I say that, what I'm really talking about is the demographics. What are the demographics of the population that is involved in our justice system? And then we're going to kind of go towards what is the treatment that's happening out there? What does that look like? Who's getting it? What's accessible for folks? And then hopefully we'll get some solutions and takeaways so that you walk away from this thinking about a few things, maybe differently or curiously, and want to learn more. That's really my goal for you, is that you get curious about this and get interested and do more work in this area. Like Christy said, drop questions in the chat box. I will take a look at those at the end of our session, just for time's sake, for people that need to hop off and can only be here for a short period of time and want to get the most out of everything I'm saying. I'm going to do it that way, and then we'll answer questions at the end. All right, so this question, what is justice, right? Well, you know, what is justice is actually a really huge question. If I were to just define it, it turns out that it would be very difficult for me to do. Okay, so I can't necessarily just define what justice is in one simple sentence. So I'm going to tell you why. And then we're going to talk about it a little more, because really, when we're talking about justice, we're talking about a big question about who is making those decisions. Who decides what justice is matters, right? Who enforces what the justice is matters, where it happens, and who are the stakeholders that are affected by it, and who are the stakeholders making the decisions for those affected. So it's very complicated, and all of those factors contribute into how you might define what justice is. In fact, you could probably take a semester course on just this slide only, right? So you could take, you know, many, many hours worth of learning just on this one slide. So we can't dig too deep, but I'm going to just kind of give you some conceptual framework as we go through the rest of the slides, right? So, you know, who is justice for? Justice is for, usually when we think about it in our society, two parties, right? So it might be that there was a perpetrator of a crime and the person who was the victim of that crime, right? Or you might think about it in terms of like a plaintiff and a defendant, like in a civil lawsuit case where someone was wronged and then takes someone to court and sues them to get their justice, right? So you're going to have two parties, whether it's two people or two entities or whatever, that are going to be discussing how to achieve some level of what we might call fairness. But what also contributes to that is the context of time, place, and dominant culture within society, right? So, you know, what arena are we talking about? Usually when we talk about justice or the justice system, we're talking about the criminal justice system in the United States, right? There's usually a presumption that that's what we're saying when we say justice system. The decision-making processes that happen for people are typically done by the dominant culture of that society, right? And if you think about context, I want us to think about like where did our justice system in the United States come from, right? What was it born out of, and how did it develop over time? Again, huge questions that would take up a semester's worth of college credits, right? We get degrees in these things, and so it's just not something that can be tackled in an hour. However, I do think it matters to say, 400 years ago when the United States was born, what was justice at that time? What were the parties that were affected by what was fair and right at that time? How did that look? And what did that look like 100 years ago? So what justice was 400 years ago is not what we would call justice today, right? What justice was 100 years ago is not what we would call justice today. So time and place and context matter dramatically, and who's affected by that matters, right? So we have to have that in the back of our minds whenever we're having a talk about law, policy, or any type of justice involved conversation. We have to have these concepts in the back of our mind of like, where does this sit in time and space? What we might say is that we're really talking about how fairness is given, divvied up, right? How do we deal with fairness with humans? The ideas of equality and freedom, moral behavior, lawfulness and order, all of these things are the contributors to how we think of what justice is. So in a justice framework, that is what we would be talking about. We usually seek to answer the question, what people are owed, right? What am I owed? I'm owed something because of what happened to me. And so I'm going to take you to court, right? And get my due. The other part of this is like, what is the punishment and how is that fair or equal based on the behavior or the crime that was committed or the problem that was created? And again, all of that is specific to place, time, culture, demographics of race, gender, identity, ethnicity, age, socioeconomics, right? So all of a sudden, like, you have like these huge things that are contributing to how we decide what a punishment is, or what we think is equal, or who's saying what we think is equal, and who's distributing that equalness to whom, right? So these are very big conceptual problems that are the basis for what I'm talking about with you. Punishment, retribution, and correcting bad behavior are the three typical things we think of when we think of justice in the United States, right? We think of Law and Order. We think of crime TV shows and, getting the punishment or getting the bad guy, punishing that bad guy because I deserve some sort of retribution because you did something bad to me, right? So sometimes we have that third bucket of we want to correct that bad behavior. And is that called rehabilitation, right? Are we talking about actually correcting, as in, the corrections system? So are we actually trying to rehabilitate someone through this process that we call justice or not? And that is another question to keep in the back of your mind. Here's three ways that we can really narrow in on what justice is, or you think about it as there's the different types of justice that could be offered. The first one is distributive. So distribution is a concept of, I usually use like an example of, let's say you have 4 kids and you have 1 can of soda. You might take out 4 glasses and pour the soda into 4 glasses, divide it up 4 ways evenly, because, they might fight over it if you don't give them the even share of soda, right? And then there's some sort of justice in that process, right? It's a fair distribution of what is available and provided out to all of the kids evenly. And the reason why we're giving it evenly is because they all deserve it, right? They're all equal. They're 4 kids. They're all the same age, and we don't view them as one better or worse than another. However, if one of them acted out badly recently, like right before we were giving out the soda, right? We might say, okay, Johnny, you know what? You're not going to get soda because as a punishment for your bad behavior, we're not distributing soda to you. So only these three get the soda and your punishment is no soda. That would be the second bucket here, which is retribution, kind of, right? We start to get into a concept of, well, there is a proportional punishment based on the crime that Johnny committed in the family, right? He tore up some papers and got in trouble, and now he doesn't get to have sugar for the day. And that is proportional punishment for his behavior, and therefore the other kids get to have this good thing and he doesn't, right? And that is kind of how we think of the criminal justice system in the United States is a retribution process typically. And then we also have the restorative process. So restoration means to repair, right? We're talking about repairing over punishing. Or repairing more than punishing, maybe think of it that way. So in restorative justice processes, what we'll do is bring in a victim or and the perpetrator together in the same room to have conversations to find healing. We think of it as a reparative process and a process of accountability for the individual who committed the wrong behavior. And the victim who gets to have a voice and say how that affected them. So frequently they do it with juveniles, right? So there's usually restorative justice with juvenile justice and an opportunity for, property crimes, things like that, where with juveniles where they get to do a restorative process. A lot of that conceptually comes out of Native American culture, where Indigenous people have been doing restorative processes for a long time when it comes to societally organizing the law around that justice process. Okay, so we kind of think of these three different buckets when we think of justice: distribution, retribution, and restoration. And again, usually when the bulk of us in this group would be thinking about it in terms of retribution, right? You killed someone, you go to prison, right? That kind of thing. The thing is that justice is not just a concept or a system for law. It is also an aspirational goal that people can have or societies can have just generally. And I think when you start to conceptually move towards this like goal-oriented process, we start to say, how are we being fair to all the people in our society? That implies that there are social contracts that we all enter into. Okay, so now we're doing like sociology 101, right? So like the agreed upon standards, the beliefs that we might all have. And in fact, that is something that is problematic in our society, right? Is that maybe we don't all have the same beliefs. And so what we seek in the United States is to figure out where we do have common belief and how that can be distributed out as a goal of fairness and equality to all that are citizens of the country, right? And that would be an assuming that we all buy into that same contract, buy into the same laws, and believe that we can come together for a fair distribution of justice, right? So that's kind of like what I mean. It's like sort of its own goal in its own way. It's a hope for how we might want to treat each other with fairness and okayness, and it is a way to organize humans, right? So again, I think the point being that when we think of justice, we want to have this framework of what is fair, what is right, what is equal for all humans as an aspirational goal. And then, as the title of this group for today says, where does that intersect with health? Right? So what does it mean if I'm talking about justice and behavioral health? What does it mean if I'm talking about justice and health generally? Well, really what I'm trying to say is what is fair and how we treat all people so that they could be physically, mentally, socially well. What does that mean, right? What is justice in that context? Well, we have to figure out that intersection. So they can feed each other, right? So we might think of it as like, if I'm distributing health out to the United States citizens, what would be just and right for all of us? Or we might think about it in the opposite way, in a systemic way within the justice system. So if I'm in the justice system, how do I distribute this? And who deserves health and well-being within that system? So there's a different kind of perspectives that you can take, and this can be kind of a complicating issue in talking about this problem, which is why a lot of people don't talk about it, because it's very complicated. But essentially, what I'm talking about is that distributive process, right? Rather than that retribution process, I'm talking about distribution of health, or power, social role, capacity, right? All of these things are justice concepts. It's not just about creating law and policy, but also about creating roles for all of us, and health and well-being for all of us, and how we distribute that. Okay. If I haven't just totally lost you yet, let's keep on plugging away. This is sort of the backdrop or foundation within which we sit when we think about everything that comes now. Okay. Most people in our field kind of understand what the social determinants of health are and what they mean, but for our sake, I want to make sure that we all understand that there are certain things in our society that contribute to one's health and well-being. And these are the 5 domains within which social determinants of health sit: access to care, and quality of care. So do I have access to health care, and what is the quality of that care? And that determines my health outcomes in life. What neighborhood was I born in, and what environment do I live in? Like ecologically, what is the environment like, right? How much pollution is there? Like literally, like, do I have a home, and does that home have good air conditioning, right? Just basic things like that determine your health and well-being long-term. Social and community context, economic stability, and education access and quality of that education. All of those determine your own health and well-being long-term. Okay, so that's 5 components that dramatically are different depending on who you are and where you are, right? So it's important that we understand that as a part of the context of justice and health, in that it also all of these factors are also contributors to who commits crime. Okay, so like we could do a criminology course and base it on these same kind of buckets, right? Because if you have less healthcare, less ability to get educated, fewer opportunities for economic stability, and your neighborhood is in disarray, or is already like a crime-ridden neighborhood. If you have a lot of gang activity in your area, it's unsafe. The odds of you having criminal behavior yourself might be higher, right? Or if you have low-level connection to your community and difficulty with the social setting piece of this, right? All of those things contribute to criminal behavior as well. So there is a huge intersection here between outcomes of health and well-being, as well as outcomes related to behavior when it comes to crime. So again, all of that to say, now let's shift into talking about the demographics of who is actually involved in the justice system itself. Okay, so now that I have done a baby's philosophy and sociology course, we're going to talk about the demographics of the people that are actually seated within our United States justice system, and the difficulty with talking about this I'm going to mention as well. Okay, so there's some real challenges in talking about this population. The measurement process is extremely difficult within our justice system, and the definitions vary depending on who's making the definition. The locality of the precinct or the prison or the jail determines the kind of information that's gathered gathered and then what is measured from that data. So federal and state prisons, for example, are the Bureau of Prisons is going to have a certain set of data that they collect, but then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that doesn't fall under that. And it looks like this. Oh my God, I'm not going to be teaching you all of this. Don't worry. I wanted to put it up here, and I'll put it up a few more times so that I remind you just how complicated this is, right? So we have state prisons and local jails and federal prisons and jails. We also have a youth system, and then we have a system for immigration, and we have involuntary commitments. We also have a territorial prison system, an Indian country system, a military prison system. Within all of those, we have all these different types of crimes and different types of information that we gather. We have county jails, we have city jails, we have municipal jails. So many different types of laws. And so many different ways that we try to hold our people in our society accountable. It makes for difficulty with data collection. And then think about this and with the intersection of behavioral health and how to track all of this, right? So I'm saying that that's a pretty big caveat to some of the numbers that you're going to see here, but you're going to get a good gist, a broad-based idea of what we're talking about. And I think it's going to be informative nonetheless. But I do want to make sure that you understand the complexity of trying to gather data and track data across many systems in the United States. Like 33,000 different types of jails, prisons, and incarcerated places in the United States. So here is a little bit of a graph. This is a graph of it's going to compare the US population to the federal prison system demographics. I did it by race here so that we could have a jumping off point. Our federal prison system has mostly Black people in it. So 35% of our population of the federal prison system is made up of people who are Black/African American. Another 32% identify as Hispanic. And then 30% identify as white or non-Hispanic. And then all the other races are jumbled into the last 4%. Okay. How does that compare to our US population? Black people make up 13% of the US population, and they make up 35% of the federal prison system. Okay. Hispanic folks make up 19% of our population and 32% of the population in the federal prison system. And then look at white people. White people in the United States, about 59%, and 30% of them are in the federal 30% are white in the federal system. And then other races, 9% versus 4%. I find this to be pretty impactful, and I hope that you do too, in the framework of understanding a few things that I just talked about earlier, right? About justice, about where you sit in our society and what affects us, and what determines sort of health components of our lives, as well as certain types of behaviors. Who's deciding all of that, right? How is that being executed? So as a reminder, here's what I'm talking about, right? How do all of these things contribute to a person's life just simply based on the color of their skin? Right. So they actually there's huge correlations between social determinants of health and race. So, and criminal activity. Okay, so gender identity, most people who are in our justice system are male or identify as male. There are 7% are female, about 1% non-binary. Those numbers are, not perfect. Again, this is from the Bureau of Prisons. So this is going to be federal numbers. It'll include state and federal prisons. Again, a huge number of men, smaller number of women and non-binary, huge, same demographic. Again, we're talking about the Bureau of Prisons. So we're here talking about drug trafficking being the largest percentage of folks who commit crimes. The crimes that are committed, are drug trafficking charges. That's probably not surprising, right? Pretty much that's the case across the board. Offenses are typically drug-related offenses. And then, and if you look at this chart, much smaller numbers in the area of let's say murder, money laundering, fraud. There's an other category that contributes to about 66,000 or 6,600 crimes. So, it's a way higher number with drug trafficking than any other type of crime in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Crime generally is committed repeatedly by a certain number of people. Okay, so this pie graph that I threw up here is just to show you that there are a certain number of people, right? Like a little more than a quarter of the people who commit a crime do it one time and then they're done, right? So I was arrested. Did I have a criminal history? No. Okay, that's that one part on the right-hand side from like noon to 3:15, right? And then the rest are repeat offenders. Now you look at it from the perspective of 4 or more people who 4 or more crimes previously committed. So I'm arrested. I previously committed 4 crimes or more. It's the same amount as none. So 3/4 of the people have at least reoffended, and then maybe 1/3 of them have committed 4 or more crimes when they get arrested. So there's a larger percentage of people doing what I want to say it this way. There's a percentage of people who repeat offend, and then there's a small portion of people who do not repeat offend. Okay. That's just important because what we're constantly talking about in my field is how to reduce recidivism. And one of the things around justice is, are we providing a just system for people if they're not getting the health care they need in order to be better and not to reoffend? Okay, so that's something to think about as I kind of work through the rest of these slides. Are we doing that for these people? How many people are using at the time of their offense? A lot. Overall, and now these numbers are going to be encompassing of that huge pie that was insane. And I said, I'm not going to go over it just to show you what it's like in our United States system, that thing. This is inclusive of all of it. So about 55% of all incarcerated folks were using drugs or alcohol or both at the time of their offense. So over half of the people who commit a crime are either high or drunk when they do it. Okay. 20% of them are high on marijuana when they do it. So it's not as though like people who smoke weed don't commit crime. Okay. So just in case you thought that, that's not true. Sometimes clients will say stuff like that. It's not true. Here's a breakdown though. Again, we go back to the Bureau of Prisons for this information to see the comparison data around race and substance use disorder within the justice system. A very high percentage of the people within the justice system who are American Indian and Alaskan Native have substance use disorder. Very high percentage. Nearly 60% of the people that are involved in the justice system and are Alaskan Native and American Indian have a substance use disorder. It's very high. The mean for substance use disorder is right around 30%. And you can kind of see here how it distributes across different races, the percentages of people who have substance use disorders. I'm going to go over this in a few different ways, so don't feel like you have to remember this slide necessarily. Just to note that it is a high percentage of people who have substance use disorders and are involved in our system. Here's another way to look at it, and here's several different numbers. And the justice system generally will say that the people with serious mental illness is going to be somewhere between 17 and 34%. Usually we say it's usually around 30%. Serious mental illness, by the way, is another one of those definitions, like who's defining it and where are you talking about? But generally, like if you were to look it up in SAMHSA's definition and like through the federal government, we're talking about people who are unable to complete the daily tasks of living effectively. So usually it's people who are on disability or could be on disability, people who experience homelessness, people who are usually it's schizophrenia, schizoaffective, sometimes some personality disorders, sometimes bipolar, sometimes major depression. So it's usually those big psychosis, right? So those bigger types of mental illnesses, we used to call it SPMI, which is serious and persistent mental illness. They're illnesses that are lasting and are chronic and are interfering with the ability to hold a job or clean oneself or keep a home, things like that. When you compare that level to the general population, it's much, much higher, right? So the people involved in the justice system are with serious mental illness are much, much higher than those of the general population. When you look at the substance use disorder, same thing. So nowadays, things have changed in the way we define substance use disorder and the way that we track those numbers. So we're somewhere around 20% or more of the United States population has a substance use disorder at some point in their lifetime. And in the justice system, we usually say somewhere around 70% of people have a substance use disorder. It's probably very high, though. It's probably very high. Again, this is something that's hard to track. A lot of people track it in different ways and they don't always track it at all. So it kind of depends. I have 3 different numbers from 3 different groups of tracking here. So, you know, NIDA's number is 65% about. If you look at one group that took the whole of the whole population, they gave an estimate of about 80%. So who do we believe? I don't know. It's somewhere in there. Right, somewhere in there. So, you know, I guess we could probably say, I would safely say 75% of the people in the justice system have a substance use disorder at some point in their lifetime. That is much, much higher than the number in our population. There's that mess. And this is why that is why these numbers are so hard to figure out, is because these people all are tracking different things. All right. Research does show us, though, that people with mental illness are not more violent than people without mental illness. And that's a really important fact, right? We need to be sure that when we're talking about people with mental illness, that we're not equating them to violent people, because that's not true. People with mental illness do have a much harder time when they're involved in the justice system. They will be involved for longer periods of time. They will have much worse effects from being involved in the justice system. They frequently get put into solitary confinement. And in solitary confinement, folks get much, much worse. On top of that, people involved in the justice system do not get the treatment that they need. I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. Violent people are people who commit more crimes. So when I looked at that pie chart and I was talking about that 4 more crimes, repeat criminal behaviors, there's a group of people, a small group of people who commit a lot of violent crime. So that's like, if you, I don't know if you've heard numbers like this, but like, if you think about someone who has raped, usually a person who has been arrested for a rape has already committed at least 7 others. So that's just a small example of like violent behaviors or violent and sexual behaviors are repeat behaviors by a smaller number of people. They don't always mean that they're mentally ill, though, right? They're not more mentally ill, actually. All right, so here's another topic and another difficulty with numbers, but just to throw this out here, right? And general co-occurring issues in the United States, that the Pew Charitable Trust Foundation says There's about 2 out of 100 in the United States that have both co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorder. But within the justice system, those who are arrested, 15 out of 100. Okay, now these numbers were 2017 to 2019. These numbers are actually low relative to what I was just talking about, right? And partially that's because we define things a little bit differently now, and we're more inclusive of more disorders now. So again, it's a complicated, you're not always comparing apples to apples, but I just want to show you the point being that historically and today, far more people with co-occurring issues are involved in the justice system than in the regular population. So there's an overrepresentation of that population. They also, people with co-occurring issues have a less likelihood to get bonded. So they're going to spend more time in jail. They get sentenced to longer sentences typically, and they have a high rate of being put into solitary confinement. And solitary confinement has no value for someone with mental illness. In fact, it's the opposite, and it exacerbates someone's mental illness significantly. A few more things to kind of sum up what I'm talking about. We have a much higher representation of people of color within our system, much higher rates of people who are Black and African American within our system, much higher rates of substance use disorder within our justice system. I didn't even talk about this, but there's a very high rate of traumatic brain injury within the justice system. One study that that came out, I think it was like in 2019, it talks about TBIs being about 80% of the people in jails and prisons have one. Oh my God, huge numbers. Much higher rates of mental health problems. Okay, why is this? Why are these the numbers? Why is this what we see, and what does it all mean? Holy cow. Again, I think we need to think about, what does justice mean in the United States? Who's distributing the justice? Who defined what it was and is, and how the laws are made and who they affect, and is it distributed equally? And are we correcting bad behavior or not? One of the things that contributes dramatically and impactfully to crime, health, substance use disorder, mental illness, are adverse childhood experiences or adverse childhood events, ACEs or ACEs. ACE scores are high for people that have justice involvement. They're a dose response fashion for people in the juvenile justice system, meaning that, like, the higher your ACE score, meaning the more difficulties you had from 0 to 5 in your family of origin or whoever was raising you, the higher that number is, the more likelihood you will have of being justice involved as a juvenile. And of course, the more likely you are to be involved as a juvenile in the justice system equals the more likely you are to be involved in the adult correction system. Okay, so, you know, ACE prevention programs are the big thing that we know works. We don't invest in it in the United States very much. And in fact, it's, you know, constantly being a thing that's thrown about. We're trying to get universal, you know, preschool care for kids, but we don't have that in the US. And it is known to help lower an ACE score and improve outcomes for people later in life, including reducing crime behavior in adults. So, you know, this slide is to say, it's not just about substance use and mental health. It is about parenting, being raised as a kid. It is about where you stand depends on where you sit, or where you sit depends on where you stand, whatever that saying is, right? And there are a lot of prevention efforts that need to be made in order to prevent some of the outcomes that we know are effective. Again, that's a social determinants of health factor too, of like who has access to what and how do we provide that for everybody. So one of the things that's interesting is that for decades now, we have known that comprehensive substance use disorder treatment provided to criminal offenders, whether they want it or not, while they're incarcerated, helps reduce both drug use out out when they're out of prison, and it helps reduce recidivism. So when a person returns to society after being treated within the corrections community, they have better outcomes. I think that's a really important thing to know. Additionally, when I was at the Department of Justice this summer, I did some teaching there, and we had a conversation about this. There has been some argument in front of courts, federal courts, about this, that the ADA, the American Disabilities Act and Rehabilitation Act, that they use that argument to say that you need to be providing medically assisted, medication assisted treatment inside jails and prisons because it is against it's against the law, basically. You are required to do that. It's treated as a disability to have an addiction when you enter into prison or jail and you're not provided the right services for detoxing or maintaining your prescription that you're already on. It is against their civil rights. Additionally, people have been arguing now, like I think right now in front of some of the federal courts and the courts of appeals, is argument on the cruel and unusual punishment, the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution, as a factor in fighting against, not being provided within jails and prisons. So people with opiate addiction suffer greatly when they are taken off their medications cold turkey or not provided any detox services whatsoever. Not to mention which it's extremely dangerous and risky for people generally who are also using benzos and alcohol, and they could die from it. So the most common type of treatment that is received inside a correctional institution is psychiatric medication, and that's only 38% of the people who need it get it. Okay, so there's a lot of people who need psychiatric medication inside jails and prisons, and they are not receiving it, but it's the most common type of treatment that people get is the prescription. The other very common type is crisis intervention, because suicide is very high. It's the highest, it's the number one reason people die that are in our institutions is from suicide. And so crisis intervention is the most common thing that happens, which is, we'll put you on a hold, we'll put you in solitary confinement, we'll take away your privileges and make sure that you stay safe and don't harm yourself or someone else. So that's the crisis intervention kind of approach, and that's highly common within jails and prisons. I put 12-step meetings down here. 12-step meetings are not treatment, right? But they are extremely effective in helping people to get clean and sober and stay clean and sober. So a whole path of recovery that exists inside jails and prisons and is effective. So that is a very common type of offering and is effective. However, it is not like a full scope of treatment, right? 7% of people with co-occurring issues receive services for both of their problems while they're incarcerated. It's not good numbers, right? Now, these are new numbers from NAMI that I pulled out today. So in 2023, we are doing better than we've done ever probably in the history of putting people behind bars. And that is, we are providing some type of treatment to many people. About 45% of the people in local jails get some type of treatment. And about 37% now in state and federal. So that means like some type of substance use disorder treatment or some type of prescription or something, like maybe a therapy session, anything qualifies. So, take that with a grain of salt, but some type of treatment is good, right? And this is a big improvement. I wouldn't be too proud of it myself because everybody that needs it should be receiving it. But here is just another way. Again, this is a Bureau of Prisons number, so this is state and federal prisons and jails, and we offer about a quarter of the folks who need it get treatment for their alcohol and drug use, and it frequently looks like the treatment section there, right? So 19.7% of state prisoners who need treatment get it. And there's a decent number of folks that have access to a residential facility in the prison system. So that's, I mean, that's pretty good. And then they also have counseling and detox and drug maintenance programs, you know, like buprenorphine and methadone programs. But you can see like self-help education and peer counseling are the much higher numbers in the other section at the bottom there. That is much more where people wind up receiving their help. You know, over half, about 60% of the help that's received is through self-help, peer counseling, and education. Again, think about those numbers and where that's coming from. Here's some interesting research. We know that we can reduce the risk of overdose death by 85% by providing treatment for people while they're incarcerated. It's extremely dangerous for people when they get released from prison and jail. People have an extremely high risk of overdose. And so I just mentioned that because it's really an important factor that we do know that we can help prevent it. It's just a matter of offering it. So, and this is another thing that is just, I mean, I could talk about this forever, this part. You know, only 58% of locations across the United States, all locations, use standardized screening measures for screening for substance use disorder. I mean, that's kind of like one of the major problems, again, with me presenting on something to you with numbers involved in it, is most people aren't getting screened for it. So that's where like the numbers are usually much, much higher than we actually show them to be. And they're sort of like this huge unknown out there, right? So, you know, that's a silly thing because we could be screening every single person who comes through every single jail, prison, or institution in the United States, right? We could screen all of them quickly for the standardized test that's evidence-based and have really good information about them and provide them with the right care. We could. So, you know, MAT and corrections, woefully low. I've worked on this issue for quite a while now, since like 2014, I guess. And it's gotten way better in the last 2 years, like way better. And historically, it's been less than 1% of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. So less than 1% of federal and state prisons offer any MAT services whatsoever. And most that offer any MAT in any place, in any type of setting, offer it in a very restrictive way. Methadone for pregnant women is the most common one. The other one would be an injection of naltrexone upon release. Okay, those are the two most common types of MAT treatment that people will receive. The thing is, though, it significantly reduces the risk of overdose if you provide MAT services in jail. And now 14 states are offering comprehensive MAT services, which is new. This is much newer, and Colorado is one of them. So yay, Colorado. And you know, Rhode Island is sort of the forerunner in all of this and has been the marker for how to do this. And we always look to the Rhode Island folks for what they're up to do the things right. There is a huge national trend around this of trying to fix this because people have a huge risk of suicide and overdose when they re-enter into society. The major contributors to that are lack of access to care. But, you know, if we can provide medication and appointments, people really reduce their risk of overdose. But they're about 40 times more likely to overdose when they're leaving incarceration, and about 10 times more likely to die from it. All right, so to wrap this up, I want to provide us with a little context around like solution. Let's talk about solutions. Diversion is the first one, and there's a bunch of types of diversion that I've listed here. And really what I want to pay attention to is pre-police and pre-arrest, because those are the first 2 points of contact that we can completely avoid having someone get involved in the justice system whatsoever. And the one way we do that with pre-police is when you call 911 and the answering person says, do you need police or do you need emergency fire, you know, that kind of thing. And so you can say, I need emergency, I don't need the police, right? And then you get a medical response instead of a police response. And that part keeps people from getting involved in a police and in an arrest situation when it's really a mental health emergency situation. Also, we offer 988 now for suicide risk and, mental health crisis. So that helps. And that process is getting better. But then pre-arrest is the other one where, they'll have behavioral health workers that are crisis interventionists that do ride-alongs with police officers sometimes, or the police themselves are trained in that and divert people with mental health crises to treatment. Same with substance use. They will just get the person, to the medical provider and to the detox program to get them into the system for the care that they need, right? So these are cost-effective measures that do work. The thing that's not a solution is incarcerating instead of treating. Okay, so that's not a solution to our problem. That doesn't work, it turns out. And what's not a solution is justice as retribution when mental illness and substance use disorder are the actual problem, right? So if possession was the problem, well, okay, possession was the crime. The problem is I'm a substance use disordered individual that needs help, right? So if acting out wildly in public or loudly in public or interfering with something in public is the problem, or public urination is another one, like, the crime, then mental illness might be the problem that needs to be treated. We know a ton of solutions. Early childhood education is just one of them, but parenting, having more money is a solution. Community support for treatment, access to care, education, community well-being initiatives. All of these things reduce mental illness, substance use disorder, ACEs, and crime. So reducing exposure to crime. So reducing exposure to violence improves your outcomes, right? So reduce my trauma, improve my outcomes later in life. Yeah. Actively engaging in efforts to reduce racial inequality in the justice system actually is a way to improve health outcomes for people. So actively reducing racial inequality improves health outcomes for people. And then, Medicaid, there's a great program that I was a part of at Task, Cook County Jail in Chicago. And they were enrolling everybody in Medicaid as that needed it upon release from jail. So they would meet with them right before they get released. Hey, do you need your Medicaid enrollment? They would enroll them in Medicaid. So then they would have services upon release. So that's just a great program, providing that upon release and providing an appointment for their next place. Like, so in Virginia, we have community service boards. We try to get that person a community service board appointment prior to leaving the jail or prison. And that is a preventative of overdose. Remembering that the social determinants of care are the pieces that can really contribute to changing. So if we can improve those social determinants, we can improve the outcomes for people. What I want you to consider is, what is justice for substance use disorder and mental health, right? Is it punishment, retribution, and correcting bad behavior? Or is it some of that, but mostly some other things, which might look like providing treatment services in multiple environments across the continuum of a lifetime of a person, right? Instead of just within one setting. Is it for anybody? Does everybody deserve to have treatment? Does everybody deserve to have medication for their mental illness? Even an incarcerated person, does an incarcerated and mentally ill person deserve to have help? And what about recovery? Do all people deserve a chance to live in recovery that need to? And could we do better? I just posed that to you. That's it. Thank you so much. Here's my slide information, my contact information. So contact me with questions. I see there's a bunch in the chat box. Christy, what do we have?
So there was just some comments along the way. I asked for questions. I've gotten a lot of great presentations and whatnot. I'll throw something at you because I am interested in this, is when you're looking at treatment options within the federal prison system.
Mhm.
If they are there, how, there's always the possibility that somebody is not going to choose that,
Correct.
right? So how do you factor that into your numbers when a lot of people do and a lot of people need those options and they need them upon leaving, but how do you encompass that whole group when some of them are like, yeah, I don't need you
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm not on board.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the problems and the major factor of measuring,
Right.
right? Is sort of there's always this, we used to call it what dark matter, like there's like a black hole over here that you can't is always unknown
Right.
in our work, right? So in the criminal justice system work that we do, in all of it, in criminology, in
Mhm.
victimology, I mean, in all of the types of work, that's true. And in what you're bringing up, that's true. It is a massive unknown of who rejects help, right?
Right. So how do we make it to where they don't want to reject the help? That's where we've got to find and I especially appreciated when you talked about all the things that could happen to prevent and the exposure to violence, the exposure to drugs, the exposure within their communities. And then you're looking at a much more complicated, how do we change the culture and the community with which they are exposed to, because now you're looking at the families that have been there for decades. You
Mhm.
know, how do you make that impact and shift it so they have this available to them?
Right. So those are such big questions, right? So, and then I think somebody just was saying, like, how do we get Colorado to invest in prevention efforts, right? So they don't get
Right.
involved, which is what you're asking also. And, I
So it's a
mean,
cost thing.
it is always a cost thing. It is cost effective. So
Right.
people have to be legislators, politicians have to be presented with the fact that it's actually cost effective to do it, because it's extremely trillions of dollars expensive
Right.
drain on our system with substance use disorder and mental illness. So prevention efforts need to be promoted, and that
Right.
is like that community-based
Yeah.
education availability, healthcare availability, all of those kinds of things, right? Um,
Yeah.
no,
So it
someone
looks like,
was,
yeah, Leah's got some things. Um,
yes.
and I'll let you read that if you want. You don't, unless you need me to.
Yeah, no. So, okay. So Leah said, on the topic of mental illness in corrections, as an individual previously worked in corrections, one of the major issues I encountered was individuals, many jails cannot force psych meds. Yeah, that's a huge problem, actually. It's a huge
I
problem.
was worried about.
Yeah. So it's created a major issue. Folks are on lengthy wait lists for incompetency. So in Colorado, there is one hospital. And so determining incompetency and then getting them to the state hospital is over a year. And I have had that experience as well, Leah. Leah, that might be, I don't know if you're the Leah that I used to work with, actually. We used to deal with that. And I used to work in the first judicial district. Anyway, so yeah, that is a real problem in Colorado in particular. But figuring out legislatively, again, do we have a law where we can force people to take medication against their will? Well, sometimes if they are incompetent, you can force them to do so. But yeah,
Right.
there's some really hard issues there that are very real. And again, that's sort of an unknown number of people that are falling into that category of why that number of 38% are receiving medication that need it. Maybe another 38% of them are refusing to take it. I don't
Right.
know, you know?
And I think the best thing that we can do, that you're doing, is to continue to talk about it and bring this out into the light and hit the legislative avenues that you have, because this is very unknown information to most people.
Yeah.
So I really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and to
Yeah.
talk about this. I think we've got one more and then we'll let you go. It says, any considerations of mental health courts in the jurisdiction of these jails or prisons? And was this looked at, or due to being mental health court was not a factor?
So mental health court is considered part of the diversion programming, which is kind of a misnomer, right? I used to be a problem-solving court coordinator for the First Judicial District and worked in the mental health courts. The way that we measure those numbers is different than what I was talking about here. So none of those numbers include any of that. Or drug courts or veterans treatment courts or any of those. None of those numbers are included in any of this. That's a whole different topic. Actually,
Right.
I would actually call it, they're considered diversion, but they're not. And they should be their own entity altogether, right? So, and though somebody else was asking about, like, do I present to the law enforcement and
Right.
legal community? And I do. That's part of the work I do. So yeah, throw my
Okay.
name out there if you ever have folks that you want me to get in front of. I'm happy to do it. That is part of the work that I do. So yeah. Yeah.
Oh, Jessica, this is amazing. Thank you so much for taking time today to do this. I got a lot out of it. I see a lot of people commenting that they too appreciated it. Again, this presentation will be available on our website by end of day Friday. Slides will be in your email, so you have access to that. And if you need to get a hold of Jessica, her information will also be in the email. Stay tuned for details. They're coming at you soon for next month's webinar. We'd love to see you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. Jessica, we'll see you soon.
Thanks, you guys. So good
All
to
right.
see you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.